Greetings, weary travelers, come, set with me by the fire and rest for a spell. I shall tell you the tale of Galladon, the wandering green wizard. First, I should provide you with some context about wizards, magic, and the great sanctum in which they are taught. In the lands residing past the peak of Mount Throng, in the plains of Crosveen, stands a fastness of ivory spires and obsidian walls. The wizard kingdom of Volnax. For those seeking entrance into Volnax, it is customary to receive an invitation to take part in the Trinax Games. And in truth, this is the only way to enter the realm of wizards and live to speak of it. For the lords of sorcery do not take kindly to trespassers, and more than one imperial agent has disappeared in the act of trying to learn the secrets of the enchanted city. It was reported by one Lord Huron Bellicus that upon entering the city to attend the 947th Trinax Games, spotted a gargoyle with the face of his most trusted agent, and though the face was frozen in a scream of pain, the eyes were filled with a cold, endless hatred, and they were following him. Should the necessary arrangements be made and permissions acquired so that one is allowed to enter the gates of Volnax unharmed and unchanged, they will find themselves striding upon marble streets lined by plants of impossible variety. Wind-swept frost pines from the peak of Mount Throng, death's kiss lilies from the Jarkani swamps, and even fire orchids found only in the volcanic island home of the dwarves. It is true that a herbologist could spend a month listing and categorizing all the plants they see, and they would not have walked a dozen paces from the main gate. Being that Galladon, Tree Father, Lord of Fen and Grove, Keeper of the Deep Woods, is the focus of our tale today, I shall keep the description of the great wizard kingdom for another time. Suffice to say that were it not for Galladon, all the horticultural wonders of Volnax would be little more than dust and rot. Little is known about Galladon's travels before he first appeared at the gates of Volnax, coming on nearly 5 centuries ago. It has been hypothesized that he was a child of the tribes that live along the edge of the great Yongora forest. Some say that his village was destroyed and he was taken in by dryads. Others say that he himself, born of those dryadic woods, brought ruin to the village as vengeance for their trespasses into the ancient forest. While the true events of his past are lost to time, the records of his exploits in the wizard kingdom are far better documented. As I stated earlier, the only way to enter the city is by invitation. The Archcouncil sends out low mages called seekers across the lands to search for potentials, beings that show an aptitude for magic and give them a chance to participate in the Trinax Games. When Galladon arrived, he had no such invitation, simply stating that he was the wandering green wizard of Yongora and that he was warned of a terrible danger coming from the Jarkani swamps to the west. The inherently insular and suspicious council told Galladon to peddle his stories of danger and doom elsewhere, for they had no need of aid from a Drugkin, a colloquialism created by the high mages for those they describe as mud-dwelling savages who are far too friendly with the creatures of the forest, if you get their meaning. This did not discourage Galladon, for he had heard the disparagements of city folk before. He did not hold their naivete against them, for he found it was an all too common occurrence for those who band together behind walls of stone to forget the ways and spirits of the wild. Though he had hoped his wizarding cousins would have been more enlightened. Seeing that arguing brought him no closer to convincing the Arch-Council of the storm gathering on the western horizon, he decided to make camp in the low fields outside the city and wait. Soon it would be impossible to ignore his warnings. As dawn broke on the inhabitants of Volnax the following morning, they were met with a curious sight. A tree had sprung up overnight. An oak that looked as though it could be hundreds of years old, ancient and wise, glowing with dryadic runes. All around the base of the oak, small creatures ran to and from what appeared to be small doors and hatches set in the bark of the tree. Birds of exotic species landed in the boughs and sang messages into little woodpecker holes. At the center was a green door with a copper knob and a small window. Out one of the sides, A small stovepipe puffed away rings of smoke that drifted on the early morning breeze. This continued for several more days, and once a week had passed. The novelty of the green wizard and his tree had worn off. The people of Volnax went back to their regular business and carried on as usual. For a while it seemed like the visitors' warnings of danger in the west were nothing more than the ravings of a vagabond. That is until a seeker rode into the city just after dark, screaming that death was hunting him. Mages of the Court of Healing did what they could to calm his mind and mend his wounds, but he quickly succumbed to his injuries. It was as though the life was dragged out of him. Worse still was the horror that followed. Soon after the spark of life had left his eyes, it was replaced with the green blaze of necromancy. The now reanimated corpse of the former seeker leapt upon an apprentice healer with a speed and fury never before seen in the risen dead. As it tore its way through the hospital, those it left in its wake were similarly quick to succumb to their wounds and rise anew. By the time dawn broke over the city, over 100 people had been killed and been reanimated. In the end, it took the combined efforts of 6 high mages of the Court of Fire and the arch-wizard of the Court of Storms, Tiberius Cain himself, to put an end to the rampage. Once the dust had settled, the Arch-Council convened to determine the best course of action. Necromancy of this strength had never been seen before, and the rate of reanimation was unheard of. Raising the dead, as it had been known, was a laborious process requiring time to perform dark rituals, gathering of key rare ingredients, and most importantly a necromancer in close proximity to control the awakened dead. An exhaustive search was performed throughout the city, but no such ritual sites or dark wizards were found. Another great concern was how difficult it had been to destroy the undead. It had taken nothing less than the wizard's most powerful spells to end the monstrosities. Undead were a tenuous facsimile of life at best, slow-moving, fragile creations that gained strength in numbers. What they had fought last night was something entirely different. It had been determined that the seeker was from a village 2 days' ride from Volnax, and after a great deal of debate, much to the consternation of Tiberius Cain, it was decided that a scouting party of high mages led by Cain would go to this village and discover the source of this threat. As the Storm Wizard's party left the western gate heading towards the swamp, he found the lone oak residing along the path. Though he had been sure it had lain in the low field north of the city, here it was outside the western gate. Resting on an old yet sturdy-looking rocking chair sat Galladon, a long ornate mahogany and copper pipe hanging from his lip. As the party passed by the oaken home, Tiberius stopped on the road just in front of the green-robed wizard. Cain got his first close-up look at the curious character. Dark green robes adorned the small figure. Fastened with a worn but well-cared-for leather belt, they seemed to be made as much of moss and leaves as any type of cloth. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that had the color of golden wheat. Looking up from his lap where a chipmunk was busy chittering away, Galladon asked what good will a handful of mages do against the horror that assailed the city last night. Tiberius asked him how he knew of the events that took place in the city, even as a little yellow finch landed on Galladon's shoulder, chirping in his ear. He simply smiled and said that he knew much of what goes on in nature around him. The smile vanishing from his face, he told Tiberius that if he wished to return from this journey, he would need to allow Galladon to accompany them. For he had seen what was coming through the eyes of the birds, and felt its teeth in the flesh of this poor creature. He pointed to an injured deer lying against the base of the tree on a pile of leaves. Upon closer examination, he could tell the animal had been bitten. He asked Galladon how the animal still lived when the people of Volnax succumbed so quickly. With a kind smile, he turned towards the injured creature and said that the true secret of life will always reside in the wild places of the world. Though not fully trusting this wandering sage, Cain could not deny that Galladon had succeeded where the healing mages had failed. He agreed. and rode on to catch up with the rest of his party after Galladon said he had to attend to some matters and that he would meet them on the road. After Cain had rode away, Galladon turned to the ancient oak tree and smiled. He patted the trunk of his old friend and said that he would need him to be ready if things did not go as planned. Galladon laughed after the old oak asked him if his schemes ever went as planned. As the party of wizards made their way west, up came Galladon astride a great elk. Cain noticed the sage's staff on his back, a shaft of gnarled wood that he could not identify. Affixed on the head of the staff was the head of a forest drake. Cain was stunned, for forest drakes were known far and wide as the Green Death of Yongora. Few who have seen them have lived to tell of the extraordinary event. Unable to contain himself, Cain asked Galladon how he managed to obtain such a trophy. Galladon smiled and patted the drake head on his staff and simply said it was a gift. The party continued on, and as day turned to night, they stopped to make camp near a hillock to block an uncomfortable wind blowing from the west. As tents were erected and fires lit, it became apparent that Galladon had brought neither tent nor bedroll. Upon seeing this, one of the mages said to another that he would have thought the Green Wizard of Yongora would be prepared to rough it in the wilderness. Overhearing this, Galladon chuckled. Then he took up his staff and walked over to the low hill and began to hum. The sound was like wind through the trees on a summer's eve, not like the foul wind blowing from the west. All that could hear it felt a deep warmth within them, and as their eyes were turned to this mysterious sage, they saw that something was happening against the hill. Roots rapidly grew from the earth, braiding and curling around one another. As this continued, the roots began to form an arch against the hill. As Galladon finished humming, the last of the roots knotted themselves together. Standing back to inspect his work, Galladon found that the others had gathered around him to watch. With the fuss of a grandfather tending to his grandchildren, he bid that they would come inside out of the cold and warm themselves at the fireplace. He strode to the arch, and after knocking 3 times, a small copper knob appeared, which he turned and with a shove swung the earthen door in. As he disappeared into the hole in the ground, they heard him ask that they leave their shoes in the hall by the door. After trading some suspicious looks at one another, Cain walked into the underground abode. Upon entering, the wizards were greeted by the warm air of a roaring fireplace and the smell of fresh bread. The musical whistle of a tea kettle sang from deeper in the dwelling. Set close to the door was a hook for each of their robes and a stool for their shoes. After shedding their extra layers, the group walked towards the dining room where Galladon was tending to a small oven. A table was set with a place for each of them, and after they had eaten supper, they found their rooms. Beds covered with thick quilts and furs were arrayed along the walls. As the rest of the party turned in for the night, Galladon and Cain sat by the fire and spoke of the trouble to come. As dawn broke with rosy fingers, the group of travelers set out from the mysterious hut as the root archway receded into the ground. During their talk the night before, Galladon informed Tiberius, through the use of his animal spies, that the necromancer responsible for the blight in the west is a lizard man named Kotek. He is a servant of Zeldon the Black, the Grand Lich of the Blasted Desert. From what he could gather, Kotek came to power recently after he returned from his pilgrimage in the south. He quickly overturned the local leadership and began a cult of death that has now reached its zenith and is looking to make a play for the Wizard Kingdom. It is in Galladon's opinion that Kotek is working in the direct interests of the Great Lich, and that thwarting his move against Volnax is not only imperative for the survival of the Wizard Kingdom, but that of the entire realm. From there, they made all haste west to the river town of Bjorn's Folly. This, Galladon had told them, would be where their battle with Kotek would commence. They rode hard until midday, when they stopped to rest their horses by a pond. The mounts of the wizards were slick with sweat and breathing heavily as they drank deeply from the still water. Tiberius noted when Galladon rode up beside him that his steed must be one of the elk lords of legend, for not only was it not breathing heavily, but it also looked as fresh and ready as the day they had left Volnax. Galladon scratched the grand beast behind the ears and simply said, "Yes." Hopping down from his saddle, Galladon walked over to the pond and, pulling a copper flask from his robes, knelt down and poured a measure into the cool water. The silver liquid shone in the air, and as it contacted the pool, the surface lit with a glow like moonlight. The horses whinnied and pulled back until Galladon spoke to them and assured them that it was safe and would restore their strength. As he walked back to Tiberius, he told him that the mysterious liquid was water from the sacred moon-viewing lake in the heart of Yongora. "It will allow us to get moving faster," he said, and he assured him that they needed to get moving soon. For if they did not reach Bjorn's Folly before the enemy departed, then their chance to stop this plague had slipped through their fingers. This, my dear travelers, is where I must end this tale tonight. Take your rest by the fire, and let your dreams take you. When next we meet, I shall tell you of the Battle of Bjorn's Folly and the fate of Kutek Rot Scale. But for now, I must wish you a good night and pleasant dreams.